Hello everyone and welcome back to another reading wrap-up. Today I'm going to be reviewing my reading month of June 2024. I'm going to be discussing my statistics as well as what books I read and what I thought about all of them in a brief overview in this new format. And as always, I want to hear about how your month went. I want to hear about what you read in June, what you liked, what you didn't like, and how you feel like your reading year is going, especially since we're at the halfway mark of 2024, which is really hard to believe. So let's dive in. First, I'm going to show you my overall statistics via StoryGraph, and then I'm just going to show you the titles of the books that I read and my thoughts about them in Goodreads. So there's going to be two different websites used. So this is June 2024. I just trust Goodreads statistics. I don't go, or not Goodreads, StoryGraph statistics. So these might be a little off, but they are close enough to accurate. And I was really surprised initially at seeing that I read 21 books in June. So I was not in a reading mood at all in June, and this is normal for me in the summer. I don't read as much in the summer. I read more in the summer when I was in school because summer would be my time off. But now that I just work year round because I'm an adult with a job, I find myself in the summer wanting to do a lot more outdoor activities that is harder to do in the winter where I live because I live in a place that gets cold and dark and miserable for like 9 months out of the year. So 21 books for June for a month where I felt like I didn't read a lot was a lot, and I was surprised, but after looking back, I realized I did read quite a bit. And it says here 4,407 pages. Some of these were audiobooks, but I don't distinguish between them, so 4,407 pages. My main moods were informative. I'm guessing I read a lot of nonfiction, and emotional. So 8 titles I'm tagged as informative, 5 as emotional, 4 as reflective, and then various other ones, including, did I just see dark? One was dark. My pace, most months I see that I have a very fast pace, and as you can see, I drop down to the medium and slow pace. And pace is really just the pace it took me to read, not necessarily how fast I felt the story was paced. And I think this reflects the fact that June was a slow reading month for me, at least it felt like it. I wasn't reading a lot of books very quickly, but I still managed to get through 21, which is shocking. I did read some, 7 of them were between 300 and 500 pages essentially, but over 60% of them were under 300, which tracks. And as we can see, and this tracks with the informative value, I read a lot of nonfiction, and only a portion of this was fiction. Throughout the year, over the course of a year, this will be a 50-50 split, but by month I tend to swing more heavily into nonfiction and fiction. These genres are, I believe, just what the books have been tagged on Goodreads, and as we can see, it comes through a variety. I did see that I had one romance in here, and I think I know which one that is. And it's primarily print because I don't tag anything otherwise. And my average rating for the month was 403, 20 starred reviews, and these ranged from 3 to 4 5-star reviews, which is really high. But I am very good at selecting books that I know I'm going to enjoy. It's just a talent I have. I don't read books that I feel like I'm going to hate, and if I don't like it, I'm very apt to just return it to the library and try again later or just not read that book. So it's not any surprise to me that my rating skews rather high because I'm not going to read a book I hate. I don't have time for that. Unless I feel like there's some other informative value I'm going to get out of it or I'm reading it for a book club. Now let's talk about, and this is in no particular order, the books that I read this month and a brief overview of them. Most of these will have reviews. I'll make a comment if there's a review on my channel for this or if I do not have a review on my channel for it and why. First one we're going to talk about is Witchcraft, A History in 13 Trials by Marian Gibson. This was a historical book looking at the witch trials. Of course, here in the United States where I live, the most famous one is the Salem witch trials. But believe me, witches were being hunted everywhere, and as this book makes clear, it still has an influence on the world today. So this was a very interesting book that didn't just talk about historical witch trials at the end of the Middle Ages, but also talks about the influence on modern day life and society, and I felt like this was quite interesting. I gave it a 3-star because I did have some critiques in it, and I do have a review of this one on my channel, but this was interesting enough. I feel like maybe there's a better book on witchcraft out there for me, but I did get some interesting tidbits out of this. It was divided into 3 sections, and I felt like the middle section, which is after the traditional witch burnings, witch trials that we normally think of were over, but there were echoes of witchcraft and witch trials still existing. I felt like that middle section was the best section in the whole book. That part was probably a 4-star read. The other sections were maybe a little weaker in my personal opinion. Next up was a manga, Town of Evening Calm, Country of Cherry Blossoms by Fumio Kuno. This is the second Fumio Kuno book that I have read. She writes about post-war Japan, and she really has a talent for it, post-World War II, I should add, and how civilians are affected by the wars that go on around them, which is a universal topic, not just restricted to World War II and Japan, but usually when there's a war, it is the civilians who pay a very high price for the war that's going on around them, a war they may not have had any say in or have any input in, especially if they are children. So this is reviewing life of several people over the course of several generations for someone who is living in post-war Japan, particularly the fallout from the bombings of the towns that were bombed in particularly Hiroshima, and the knock-on effect that had on a lot of people. So Kuno is really a master at what she does. She writes fantastic, moving books, and this manga was absolutely excellent. This one was an audiobook that I listened to, Isaac's Storm, A Man, a Time, and the Deadliest Hurricane in History. This was on the 1900 hurricane that hit Galveston, Texas in the United States and really changed the trajectory of Galveston's history as well as Texan history, and was the result of kind of a mix of poor meteorological communication and a lack of understanding of the seriousness of the storm that was coming, and really led to some horrific loss of life. This was an audiobook. It was interesting. You can tell Erik Larson did a lot of research in this and pulling this together, but I did give it a 3-star. It was fine. I'm glad I read it. I'm glad I have the knowledge of this now, but I'm not sure it was necessarily higher than a 3-star read for me. However, you can tell that Erik Larson is quite a good writer, and we see that the average rating of this book is 4.05 stars, which makes sense, and if you're interested in history, then this is definitely a book that is for you. And I do like to point out when I've listened to audiobooks, because I think the format in which I consume a book in is impacts the rating I give it. Hyperborea, Stories from the Arctic by Evgenia Arbugieva. This was a photography collection of Siberia, which was really interesting, and I was actually looking for a book in a different genre, but I came across, or a different topic, and I came across this book. The photography collection was super good. It was a 5-star read. I loved it. This would be a fantastic gift. And I see this as a little bit underrated and a hidden gem. The average rating is 4.64, so a very high rating, but only 14 ratings. Only 14 people have rated it on Goodreads. So this is definitely one that isn't getting the love it deserves. It is a fantastic photography collection. The photographer really focuses on the role of light. I think a lot of photographers do that, but the role light plays in Siberia, especially in a place where light is of short supply at certain times of the year, is really interesting, and I would love to personally obtain a copy of this book. I am primarily a library reader, so yeah, it'll be interesting to see how many more people discover this book, because right now this is a criminally low number of ratings for such a good book. Illustrating Mathematics by Diana J. Davis. This was a book that came out of a symposium of sorts, or a summer camp of sorts, where different math students from all around the world came together and would illustrate problems they were working on. This led to a wide variety of different mathematical and art intersections across a number of different mathematical topics, and it was very interesting, but the one thing I didn't know going into this book was that it was going to be primarily cutting-edge problems instead of illustrating problems that maybe people have more familiarity with. This was very interesting, but the text was quite complicated, and there were a number of paragraphs. The book was set up so it was art on one side, paragraph on the other, and each piece of art would get one page. The paragraphs that were accompanying the art were sometimes, to me, undecipherable, and this is coming from someone who has a moderate math background. I do have a bachelor's degree in math. Definitely not operating at the level of these people, though, but the art was fantastic. So if you are reading this book or thinking about getting this book, the art in and of itself is like 4-star and above. The art is fantastic. The text was, in some cases, impenetrable, and I would say if you don't understand the text, just let it go. At a certain point, if I didn't understand what problem was trying to be solved, because these were in many cases cutting-edge math problems, I just ignored it and just focused on the art. But there were some fantastic pieces in here, and the 3-star review just reflects my inability to understand the text. Maybe I wish someone had gone through, maybe an editor had gone through and brought it down to a more accessible level to those of us who don't have that level of cutting-edge mathematical knowledge, and allowed us to also enjoy this book, because right now I feel like the text is really geared for a highly tuned mathematical audience, but the art can be accessed by everyone, and I think the text is going to scare off certain people from even approaching this book, which is otherwise a really interesting book. The Gods Lie. This was a manga by Kaori Ozaki. This is about a transformative summer in two kids' lives. There's a young boy who decides to skip his soccer camp due to changes happening in his social circle and in the soccer team in and of itself, and a young girl who really comes from a troubled home background who is trying to hold everything together for her family. And their lives kind of intersect in a summer, and there's a lot of changes that come out of it, and it seems to be it's like a turning point, coming of age, but also a turning point moment where both these kids are kind of moving from childhood to the more serious world of adults. This was a really good book. I gave it a 5-star read. It's fantastic. It's standalone, which I love. I love manga, but one of the downsides of manga is when I get into a series, particularly if my library doesn't have all volumes, I'm going to have to be waiting for holds, and it's 45 volumes long. I'm looking at Yu Haikyuu, and I know that's not even the longest manga series out there by any stretch of the imagination. It just is a huge time commitment, and many times it's worth it for me, but I would love to incorporate more standalone manga. So if you have any recommendations for standalone manga, please let me know, because I loved this. It was short, it packed a punch, it was fantastic, and I'm not going to have to chase down volume 2 and volume 3 and volume 4. And I also think the editing can be a little tighter in a standalone manga. I find that sometimes in manga series, the first volume is quite weak, or you can have a lot of weak volumes in the series because it's been serialized and the author's pushing things out, which makes sense and has its role. I'm not necessarily discounting that. I think it's just the standalones tend to have stronger editing because they know they're going to have one shot to sell you instead of just selling you on a concept and hoping it carries through in volumes 2, 3, 4, and beyond. And people agree with me, 6,000 ratings, average of 4.03 stars, so this could be a good standalone manga for you. Next up, another entry in the Medieval Imagination series. I love this series. They're short books on medieval art and text and just the medieval thought world in and of itself, and they're heavily focused on the art with plenty of interesting text along with it. We can see here from this little subsection, Beasts, Factual and Fantastic, features vivid and charming details from the wealth of manuscripts in the collection of the J. Paul Getty Museum and the British Library, along with a lively text. The art is really heavy here, and this one is focusing on beasts and the role beasts played in the medieval imagination, history, art, texts. And even though it's a short book, it will definitely take you a long time to get through because of appreciating and enjoying the art. 112 pages, it will take you quite a bit of time to work through it. I loved it. I really enjoyed this series. I feel like the art is what really stands out, but the text provides you with enough commentary to understand the art you're looking at. And this was another book in my reading of medieval text and art that, has been keeping me entertained for a number of years at this point. Another great book to check out. And check out anything else in the series. There's also Faces of Piety and Power, which is another book in this series I've read, as well as Images in the Margin. There's a couple books I've read in this series that I really enjoy. Next, Hakusai's Mount Fuji. I don't know why I struggled so much with that. The complete views in color. This is just a collection of the Mount Fuji views from Hakusai, the Japanese master, woodblock print master. Very interesting. Very minimal commentary, just some commentary at the beginning, otherwise just the views. But if you are interested in seeing these, then this would be a fantastic book. I cannot believe this book was in my library's storage, which now I don't work for the library, so this is just my inference, but I believe they put books there that don't have enough circulation to warrant staying on the shelves. And I do have quite a big library that I can attend with many branches, so the fact that it's not getting enough movement from the large library that they weren't putting it in the basement is kind of a shame. I understand wanting to keep the collection fresh on the shelves, but this just seemed like such a good, interesting book that I can't believe it wasn't getting the appreciation it deserves. It was good. Maybe people are looking for more commentary, and there are probably better books out there for commentary, but this was fun. Random Acts of Medicine, The Hidden Forces That Sway Doctors, Impact Patients, and Shape Our Health by 3-star. I think I did review this. I think I did. I wavered on this one, but I believe I did decide to do a review of this one. It is an audiobook, or I listened to it on audiobook, and it's 2 doctors talking about different factors that influence your healthcare. So whether or not a doctor's out on a medical conference, or if it's the doctor's birthday, there's a lot of things that are outside our control that influence the medical care we receive. It was primarily focused on medical care in the United States because that's where these doctors practice, but overall it was fascinating. It felt like a collection of little, maybe it had like medical facts combined with anecdotes put together in a way that kept the interest of someone who doesn't have a strong scientific background, and I felt like it did a really good job. It opened my eyes to a lot of interesting things that I wouldn't have thought of. And I really like this little blurb down here. Does timing, circumstance, or luck impact your healthcare? The groundbreaking book reveals the hidden sides of medicine and how unexpected but predictable events can profoundly affect your health, our health. Is there ever a good time to have a heart attack? Why do kids born in the summer get diagnosed more often with ADHD? How are marathons harmful for your health, even when you're not running? It's a bunch of questions like that which really came together to form a rather interesting book. Because I listened to it on audiobook, I find myself keeping wanting to like invent. So I listen to audiobooks, I don't just sit and listen. I listen to it primarily when I'm running, driving, or when I'm doing like household chores. And I was doing household chores when I was finishing this book up, and it was just so interesting that I kept finding new things to clean in my house, new things to wash or wipe down, so I could continue listening to this book. It was 3-star because it wasn't like groundbreaking. Sometimes I feel like I'm stingy with my ratings. It was enjoyable enough. I feel like this 3.68 average rating is probably reflective of how good I thought it was. You're going to get a lot of fun anecdotes and little stories and facts out of it, but I don't know. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a 4-star read, but it's interesting. Check it out. And let me know. Maybe you disagree. Maybe this was a 5-star read for me. Please leave your thoughts below. Next was a photography collection. Backroads of the Midwest. Missouri, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. So these are some states that are normally thought of as Midwest in the United States. This is by David Skurnick. He's a photographer. And as far as I know, he does these back roads of the Midwest in other states as well. I think I saw that on his profile, but I won't click on it. So he just did some photography in the off the beaten path areas of these states. I thought it was a fun collection. I love photography collections. Unfortunately, they're really expensive to buy, probably because the artist needs to be fairly compensated. I get it, but it's sometimes painful to see the prices on these. Fortunately, I pay taxes, which go to my local library, so I can enjoy these fantastic photography collections at the expense of my taxes instead. And this was a fun one to read, and if you have any interest, maybe you live in these states or you want to check out photography from these states, definitely check out this collection. This was a book in another series I'm kind of reading. It's a nonfiction series, so those are a little different from fiction series. Medieval Life in Manuscripts. I've read some other books in this series, such as Magic in Medieval Manuscripts and Monsters and Grotesques in Medieval Manuscripts, I believe was the other one. This one, Astrology in Medieval Manuscripts, was a really fascinating read. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about it, but it was very enjoyable. Astrology was lumped with astronomy altogether as a science in the medieval times, and this book really talks about how those two were connected and how they played out, along with an emphasis of including lots of art in the book, and it was enjoyable. I think this series does a really good job of finding someone who's good at what they do and having them write a quick, as we can see, this is only 65 pages, a quick introduction to the topic that allows you to decide if this is interesting enough for you to pursue further. Also, the more I read in medieval manuscripts and art, the more the books seem interconnected, and I've read other things. I read one other thing by Sophie Page. I'm blanking on what it was right now, but I read something else by her, and I do like her work and the way that she writes, so shout out to Sophie Page, I guess. This is Komi Can't Communicate, Volume 29. I have no idea why the Goodreads record is in Japanese. I don't speak or read Japanese, so I trust that this is Volume 29 of Komi Can't Communicate. This is a manga series I'm reading. If you haven't read or don't care about Volumes 1 through 28, you're not going to care about Volume 29, but I did read this one and felt like it was a solid entry in the series. This one was about study camp. That seems to be a classic reoccurring theme in manga. So, here we are. Oh, we do have English entries. I'm just on the wrong train in Komi Can't Communicate. I always just click on the series and add the next one, and these started in English but have switched to Japanese, but I don't care. I read it in English. This was a book I didn't review. This was a self-help book on creativity. I feel like I'm not a very creative person, and I'm trying to become a more creative person, get the creative juices flowing. This was a book about creativity. I feel like it fell into some of the common traps of self-help books. I didn't rate it. It was fine. We'll leave it at that. I also did not film a review. The Saugatuck Dunes, artists respond to a freshwater landscape. This is a collection of art, primarily like oil paintings, but a lot of other mediums are represented as well. on this dune landscape that is on Lake Michigan, which is one of the Great Lakes in the United States. Lake Michigan is the only Great Lake that doesn't border Canada, so it is a uniquely American lake, but there's this dune habitat that's on the lake in a specific region that have drawn artists for a number of years, and this is a collection of that art in the book. I thought it was enjoyable. I've had the opportunity to go to this region a couple times, so I'm a little familiar with it, and I think the art was just really interesting to page through. It's 120 pages, but don't be fooled by the length. Kind of like the medieval art books, it's going to take you a while to go through it because, yeah, there's a lot of art to look at. I feel like this is kind of a niche book, but if you have any interest, I did read it, and I did review it, and the video did better than expected. Sometimes the weirdest videos, the ones I don't think are going anywhere or will only get like 10 views, are the ones that get more views than I expect. I cannot predict it. This was a reader recommendation and one that I actually really enjoyed by Richard Kiekhaefer, Forbidden Rites, A Necromancer's Manual of the 15th Century. This is in the Magic and History series, which seems to have a lot of interesting books. As a warning going into this, this is a more academic text, so these are going to take a little bit longer to dig through, and the second half of this book is the text that is being analyzed in its original Latin. I don't read Latin, so the second half of the book was kind of meaningless to me because I just don't have any understanding of it, unfortunately. But the first half was a detailed look at a text that is in the Bavarian State Library in Munich that seems to be a necromancer's textbook manual for how to do conjurations, and the author talks about the different types and formulas and categories of conjurations that are being included and kind of breaks down the purpose behind them and the similarities and differences and the history behind these forbidden rites. Very interesting, very academic. Took me a while to get through because it was so dense. It's the kind of book that would really benefit from a classroom group discussion. I can see how this would be fantastic if sitting down with other people who had also read this book, as well as like a professor who really understood the material and was able to guide the discussion. Reading it by myself, I definitely struggled at times to get everything pulled together, but you can tell that the author is really knowledgeable, and it was a very interesting text, and I feel like it gave me a interesting view on how magic was perceived in the 15th century. I think the medieval books that I've been reading tend to go in two camps. Very broad, but focused on a topic like the astrology and medieval manuscripts. We're touching on a wide variety of medieval manuscripts over a wide variety of time, but focused on one topic, astrology. A book like this focuses on just one text, but goes really deep on the one text. So there seems to be, you can either go broad or go deep, and this is one that went deep and was interesting, and if you have any interest in magic and history, this seems to be a fantastic book, and thank you to the person who recommended this. Patient Zero, A Curious History of the World's Worst Diseases by Lydia Kang and Nate Peterson. This is a book that talks about different epidemics, pandemics throughout history, and talks about the first person who is known to have had it and how the disease spread. It was interesting. I listened to this on audiobook. This was following the Random Acts of Medicine. I kind of got in this medicine groove, so I found this one and listened to it. I didn't wind up doing a review on it because I felt like I hadn't taken like good enough notes throughout this, and it was kind of fragmented around various drives and walks and runs that I did, so I did not review it, but I did find it interesting, and if you're interested in Patient Zero from a variety of different diseases, this could be the book for you. I see it's also 400 pages, which probably contributed to the page count on Storygraph, but I listened to this on audiobook. Next, The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. This is the first Leigh Bardugo book that I read, but I really enjoyed this. This is about a young servant girl who has magical powers, let's say, and her aspiring family, her low-level noble family that's trying to climb the ladder, decides to use her to achieve social prestige, basically. This was an interesting book. I really liked it. I gave it a 4-star read, and since I read this one and enjoyed it, I want to read other books by Leigh Bardugo. This was the first book I read by her, though I do know she's quite popular and has written a number of other books. And as we can see, this book is quite popular as well. 42,000 ratings at 3.88. And it was enjoyable. It was a good look, and it has a slightly happy, I'd say happy. It has a happy ending. Maybe I'm spoiling too much for now, but I like books with a happy ending. I don't dislike a book with a sad ending, but I feel like there's this movement where if a book doesn't have a sad or tragic ending, or people aren't miserably depressed by the end of the book, it's not a serious book. And I think you can have a serious book that touches on difficult topics, and it can also have a happy ending. And I was very happy that The Familiar did. The Factory by Hiroko Oyamada. I do not speak Japanese. We've already established that in this video, so I really hope I did not butcher that last name. And this was translated by David Boyd. This is The Factory, and this was an English debut of an author who is popular in Japan, or popular enough to get an English debut, I guess. And this is about some workers who find work at a factory, a very mysterious factory, where work doesn't seem to be quite the way work is at other factories. Let's just say that. Odd things happen, odd animals are seen, and slowly these workers kind of lose touch with the outside reality, having worked at this factory for a long period of time. It's quite a short read, it's 116 pages, but it was an award winner in Japan. We see these awards that it has been awarded, and it was really interesting. I read it in almost one sitting, so I do recommend this, especially if you're short on time. You want to read a lot of good books, but you don't have a lot of time. I know that's a problem for a lot of people. Definitely check out this one, and I would love to read more by this author. I think she has one more book out, and I would just love to check it out. I think this was just such an interesting concept. It like bordered on the fantastical. I see it's been labeled magical realism. So it's mostly, it feels like it could be plausible, but there's just enough weird stuff happening that keeps you on your edge. It's low level. It never crosses into horror by any stretch of the imagination, but there is some low level dread and unease you feel throughout the entire book that makes it an interesting read. Next, The Unstrung Harp, or Mr. Earbrass Writes a Novel by Edward Gorey. I had never heard of Edward Gorey before reading this book, but I was walking up and down my library aisles and I saw a thin volume, and when I pulled it out, I saw that it had pictures. It was like a children's picture book almost, but it was in the adult section. I even checked the tag to make sure it hadn't been misplaced in the library, and this was a book by an author I never heard of. He seemed to have written in the 50s. That's when this book was written. And Edward Gorey, the author, is writing a fictional story about an author and the process of writing a novel over the course of about 2 years. And it was very funny. It was very enjoyable. I liked the pictures. I liked the kind of poking fun at oneself that seemed present throughout. And I thought it was a really funny book. It's definitely the kind of book that I think has probably been overlooked since it was written so long ago. And that's kind of the shame with the constant cycle of new that occurs in our world, where there's always a new bestseller you have to keep up with reading, that these books that were written quite a while ago can kind of get buried and forgotten in the library stacks, when this one was a fantastic read, and I'm so glad I happened upon it. This was a 5-star read. I want my own copy. This was so fun. Next was a book I did not review, Art and Fear, Observations on the Peril and Rewards of Art Making. Oh, I see I added the Korean translation. I did not read the Korean translation. I read the English version. This was another book in my ill-advised quest to get the creative juices flowing. This was actually a book that I think was recommended by a professor in college during a creative writing course, which was not my idea to take, but was required by the college. And it had been on my to-read list for so long that I had actually removed it from my to-read list because, yeah, I was like, I'm never going to get to this. It's been on here for forever. And then I read it. I did not review it, though. I felt like it's like a self-help book, and those are, like, so hard to review and so personal. The final one was an audiobook, The Proof is in the Plants by Simon Hill. This was a person who is advocating for a more plant-based diet. So I'm actually vegetarian, but I did not review this, even though I listened to the audiobook and I did like it, because nutrition and your diet is so personal and people get really up in arms about it. So I obviously did not review this book. But I enjoyed it because it matched my own diet and how I eat anyways. So it was an enjoyable book, and I liked the person who narrated it. I'm pretty sure it was narrated by the author, and you can tell that he's really passionate about what he writes about. And I think sometimes when I read a book, it makes a big difference if the author is really passionate about what he writes about versus if you feel like the author isn't too passionate about the topic. I feel like there's a difference in tone throughout the entire book. So I felt like the author was passionate about that, so I did appreciate that about the author. So overall, that was my June. 21 books, which is way more than I expected. There were some shorter ones, there was some manga in there, but that was many more books than I expected to read in the month of June. So I would like to now know what you read in June, what you thought about June. Are you on track for your yearly goals if you have any? I am behind track, but I don't get stressed about my yearly goals. We'll see if I hit it or not. I feel like I'm doing fine. I had a fantastic June, read a lot of good books, and now I want to hear from you what you're reading and how your year is going so far. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.